Hello everybody, welcome again. In this session we will talk about API fingerprinting and discovery, and we will get our hands a little dirty to get some practice in finding as information as we can about API. Okay, let's start discover, and let's start by my favorite quote from Sun Tzu, the author of Art 4. He said that if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. So you need to learn as much as you can about the API before you can debug it or find vulnerability or try to exploit it. You can't go blind. You must understand and learn about the API. But what information you need to know? First, what do you want to know? What information can be helpful? First thing you need to know is where is the API endpoint, how client connect to the API, where is the backend server domain or subdomains, and you need to know how developer handle versioning. Do you remember when we talked about versioning? You need to know how developer handle it, if it explicit in URL or defined in headers or something else. Also, you need to know what is programming language used to develop this API, to know if you can exploit the language itself or something that affects this programming language. And you want to know what the data storage used by the API, if it's SQL database, MySQL, SQL Server, or it's NoSQL database like MongoDB. You need to know what caching used in the API, if it's cached by software like Varnish Cache or it's custom cache by Memcached or Radius. That will help you understand more how API handles the request. Finally, you want to know how client authenticate itself to use the API, and this is actually very important to know to understand how API authenticated, because most of API vulnerabilities in the authentication flow itself. Okay, first, where is the API endpoint? How we can find this API endpoint? First method you can use is public information. Many websites expose its API endpoint and release a developer help documents to educate the developers how to use their API. So it's a very valuable method to use. Let's try if we target Twitter, for example. First thing, we go to developer websites for Twitter. Okay, let's click on documentation. Where's the API? Let's try something like search, for example. Yes. Okay, here we can find that api.twitter.com is the API endpoint that clients connect to with Twitter backend servers. Actually, you can learn a lot by just surfing the documentation for the target. Okay. Second thing you need to do if public information don't provide the information you want is subdomain brute force. Most of API endpoints is subdomain to separate the backend server API from the main website, which may be static or in another programming language. One of my favorite tools is NotPy. So if we try to and open our terminal, okay, and let's go to and run NotPy. Okay. and let's try hackerone.com. NotPy search for a lot of things. The search and virus total database, searching for DNS entries, and search Google and other search engine. Try to scanning for subdomains. It may take some time to finish, and you can install NotPy easily. It's a Python script, so go to GitHub repository and follow the instructions, and because it's Python you can install it on all operating system. Okay, let's here's the result. We see clearly that api.hackerone.com is the API endpoint along with its IP, and also the server type of the endpoint. Here is Cloudflare Nginx. Okay, the third method is to debug it yourself. You can debug the client by putting proxy like perp, so you can easily catch what endpoints he connects. We will go through how to debug in the next session. Last thing I would like to say about API endpoints, it may be more than one API point, more than one endpoint for the API. So let's take so.com as an example. So.com is an e-commerce website. So if we go and search so.com, about so.com, so.com is already listed on HackerOne, so let's go to HackerOne page for so.com, and if we scroll a little, we will find API section. Here we will find two API endpoints instead of one for general purpose, and there is mobile api.so.com. This is clearly for mobile connection, so you have to discover all the possibilities and all information before debug the API. The next one is how developer handle versioning. To see some examples, if we go back to Twitter API, here we find the API explicit version in the URL. So Twitter api.twitter.com slash version 1.1, this is the version, and the following will be the rest of the URL. Again, you can learn a lot from public information and the developer documentation. Another example is Vimeo. Vimeo is a platform like YouTube. So if we try to grab Vimeo's headers, so curl tag I, and the domain we want to grab its headers, vimeo.com. Here we will see this is the headers for the normal request for Vimeo. So let's try the API. Okay, here we see content type application slash vnd.vimeo.error plus JSON. If we remember how API versioning can be in header itself, this is a good example. So here application slash namespace of Vimeo, and this is supposed to be a version of API, but in here, because we are requesting the API without authentication, so Vimeo returned it with error. But it's a good indicator that Vimeo uses header to define which API version to use. And also you can debug it yourself to find how clients tell backend server which version to use. Okay, now let's talk about how to discover the programming language used in API. First method is to look at public information. Again, the public information is a big source of information to use. But in this case, we will look at two interested sources, company jobs and LinkedIn. Company jobs can reveal a lot of things about language used in the company. So if company offer jobs for PHP developer or Ruby on Rails developers, so you can know clearly that company uses PHP or Ruby. If we have an example of this, I think Slack is a good example. So if we go to Slack career page, this is the job page. If we click on engineering, let's say senior application engineering, in the description itself it say that the position is to build features, design and implement API methods and improve the performance and reliability of our systems. And there is a line here, application engineer builds the server side of Slack using PHP and Hack. Hack is a version of PHP developed by Facebook, and MySQL as a backend server and Linux. So clearly that's a very good indicator that Slack uses PHP, Hack and using MySQL as a database engine in a Linux platform. Another good source is LinkedIn profile. If you didn't find helpful information in company jobs, you can look at LinkedIn and search for employees in this company and look at their skills to find what connects them. So if you find two employees, one good at PHP and Ruby on Rails and the other good at Ruby on Rails and Node.js, so that you find the Ruby on Rails connect them, that indicate that the company using Ruby on Rails as backend language. Another thing is company engineering blog, so you can find helpful information about programming language they use and the instructions infrastructure they use. Also you can use social engineering, but most of companies deny and prohibit this action, so we will not have this conversation in the course, but we can always get very helpful information from social engineering. Last method, you can use server headers like server, export by or X header in general. You will find a good information in the headers. Let's see some example. If we want to debug API for so.com, let's open our terminal again. We go to curl I https api.so.com. Here is the content type application/JSON and server Apache. This indicates that website uses PHP because Apache in general serves PHP. Okay. Finally, you need to know how client authenticates to use API. Again and again, you can use the public information to know how client connects to the API, and you can debug it also to find this information. That's all for now. See you next time for the debugging. Thank you.